Welcome, Stormy. Good to have you back.
Hi,
Former
Jack.
fellow AICGS alumnus, loyal as you are, but also now head of the Division of Economic Policy at the BDI, the Federal Association of Industry.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that very boring topic of TTIP, which everybody is talking about, but no one knows is actually how it's going to end this rather long saga. It's been going on for a long time. The status at the moment is that we're expecting some discussions throughout this year. Maybe we'll put some signatures on papers at the end of this year on both sides of the Atlantic. And then we have to go through the legislative process. Am I right on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. No, absolutely. First of all, for us, it's not such a boring topic.
I'm sure it's every day for you.
It's every day.
Yeah, right.
And it's really one of the most important issues in foreign economic policy we are currently dealing with. It's TTIP every day. With regard to the schedule, the next round of negotiations will take place end of February. And we are expecting that the negotiation partners will put some more offers onto the table in areas which they haven't done yet. So, for example, government procurement.
Oh.
So there are still some really big negotiation areas where they have not exchanged offers yet. Another area where they have also not intensely talked about yet is investment protection. As you know, the EU Commission has developed a new proposal which it has submitted to the US only in November, December. So that's another really big issue they have to tackle. So this year, there are lots of things still to do. There are lots of consolidated texts which have to be written and an agreement to be found on many tricky areas. As far as we heard, both the EU Commissioner and the USTR really want to get this done this year, but that is ambitious. So what I expect until the end of the year is that there will be, if we are lucky, an overall consolidated text, a draft, and if we are lucky, a political statement. And then in 2017, they would have to do a lot of fine-tuning still, get into some nitty-gritties. And then after that, there can be a signature of such a proposal. It has to be translated in all the EU member states' languages. There has to be a legal scrubbing where they check if everything is all right in the text. And only when that has been done, we get into the ratification process. So we are still looking for a pretty long road. Even after a political declaration, it can take 2 or 3 years until we actually do see a TTIP contract
in operation.
In
wow,
force.
so this could be 2 or 3 years down the road, at a minimum. Yeah,
oh,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's complicated enough. I know that there are certain things that are really for the experts, like you are, on ISDS and a number of other things that are involved. But I want to kind of broaden the telescope here a minute, because if there's anything that's caught people's attention, at least in the world that you and I work on, it's this blowback in Germany, this blowback in Holland and Austria.
It's Austria, it's Germany, it's Luxembourg. Surprisingly.
Yeah.
And not so much in the other southern European states like Italy or Spain or France.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. I happened to be in Berlin the day after the 250,000 people were on the Pariser Platz. I mean, it was rather extraordinary. And even to this day, you know, when I'm in Germany, I hear a lot of this stuff, pro and con. Let me ask you this question. You might find it coming from left field, but let me ask it anyway. How much of this is about TTIP, and how much of this is just about what you call in German Wutbürger and what we call Donald Trump supporters? In other words, how much of this is really about the subject, and how much of it is about something else?
I think there are many reasons which explain the strong opposition in Germany. I would say it's not monocausality. So I think in 2013, when the negotiations started, mid-2013, there was very unfortunate timing, because that was right at the time of the NSA scandal. So a lot of trust, I have to say, was lost, and many people were quite angry with the United States. Also, the really strong transatlantic supporters were a little hesitant coming up with their support at that time. So that's certainly one of the reasons, mistrust towards the United States. Another reason is that 2013 was also, I would say, a little bit bad timing because we had the German elections going on, and then afterwards the Grand Coalition had to be formed. So the government was a little bit quiet on the issue while the opponents already had organized and started their social media campaigning. The proponents, the supporters, were pretty quiet during the first month. And not just the government was quiet, also business was quiet. And I have to say that business underestimated the
resistance.
Looking at previous free trade agreements, which really didn't get that much attention in the public. Who cared about negotiations between the EU and South Korea, for example, or between the EU and Canada? It's really that the opposition started with the TTIP negotiations, and business had underestimated that in the beginning and also didn't speak up too much. So you had a very well organized opposition, which is really well equipped with social media tools and is very well organized. And you had a late start of the supporters on the other side. I also think it has something to do with a mistrust towards EU institutions. People, since the financial and economic crisis, it seems like that the EU stumbled from one crisis to another. The financial and economic crisis had not been overcome yet. Then we had the Greece crisis, and now we have the migration crisis. And people feel extremely insecure if the EU level is really governing in their interests.
Right.
Plus, I think that people in Germany are also becoming increasingly uncertain and insecure about globalization. We were lucky really the last few years. We had pretty high growth rates, low unemployment rate. We fared comparatively well in the European Union, right? Around us, an ocean of uncertainties, economic crises, geopolitical crises, terrorism, and we have been a little bit of an island in that regard. So where we, in our dialogues we have with public citizens, where we get a lot is, why should Germany integrate further into the world? We are doing so well. We are exporting. Why should we open ourselves? It can't get any better. It rather gets worse because we become more vulnerable towards the risks of globalization.
Right.
And sometimes we feel that the benefits, people forget the huge benefits of globalization and that Germany really lives from being integrated.
But Stormy, there is an argument to say that there's not only going to be winners with TTIP or TPP. Sure. There could be both. There's always going to be some winners and losers, and I guess that's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle here. People don't know which side of that equation they're on. Are they winners or are they losers, right? That's one of the problems I see. How do you carry that through? You have to be realistic about this.
This is a narrative which usually isn't, or also in the past, hasn't been told so much, but all trade liberalization always creates winners and losers,
right,
because it creates more competition,
right, and
not all sectors or industries will be able to compete globally, and there will be a redistribution effect. Overall, however, academic studies show that there is a great correlation between opening your market and overall economic growth and overall economic wealth and income. So what TTIP will achieve is that there will definitely be a boost for growth and jobs, but I would not be honest if I would say there wouldn't be also a redistribution effect. Having said this, I think it's really important to have competition because it makes us innovative, it makes us smart, and it makes us to modernize. And without doing this, we will not be able to compete in the future and also keep our standard of living. And that is, I think, something which a lot of people forget, is that a standstill is really not an option. If we want to keep the standard of living we have, we do have to move.
Right. I think that's understandable with the head, but not always with the heart, right? One of the problems, I think, is that, and you mentioned it's interesting you said that, business and politicians may be lagging behind some of the opposition that were organized in 2014 and a number of the other issues around it, the uncertainty about Ukraine, the dealings with, the immigration crisis, all of those things. And yet, throughout all of this, and this, of course, comes back to my initial point about the fact there were 250,000 people on the Pariser Platz, Germany, once again, is absolutely central to this. And as I understand it, the government stands full square behind this. So Germany's here on the cockpit. What is it that, to zero in on that particular element, what is it that you think Germany can do? Because obviously this is an EU-US treaty. So you're dealing with a huge parliament in Strasbourg and a lot of other people that have agendas a mile long. But if you are looking at what Germany's strategic role in this is, and God knows it's strategic, what does Germany have to do in this particular year? You have some elections, maybe coming up in next month in March, and then maybe one or two more in the fall, and then you've got the national elections next year. We have our circus over here now at the moment. But I mean, what is it that you think Merkel, the government, Germany itself needs to do to rally 27 other allies here in this process? Because eventually you're going to need 28 signatures.
That's right, but I first think we have to do our own homework at home. There's a lot still to do. I think what is really good is that there's now more transparency, because that's one of the things I forgot to mention earlier.
Yeah.
People are also uncertain about TTIP negotiations because in the beginning, to be honest, we did have a problem with transparency of the negotiations.
Right.
So I think the Commission has become very transparent. Those negotiations are the most transparent we ever had. And just last week, reading rooms were opened for parliamentarians to look at the consolidated text. And I think that is very important. It's really important to talk to the Bundestag, to have a good communication between the Ministry of Economics and Chancellery with the Bundestag, because if this is a mixed agreement, it will have to be voted on by the Bundestag.
Right.
So obviously they have a great interest in that. But it is also the EU Commission which has to talk to the Bundestag and provide the necessary information for the Bundestag to have a well-informed opinion. So I think that is very important, the dialogue between the EU level and the national level.
Right.
And it is not just the EU with us, with Germany, but also in other member states where the dialogue has to sometimes even be initiated, which doesn't work so well so far, but that's a to-do on the to-do list.
Okay.
And then the second thing which has to be strengthened, and this is also where we come in, where business also comes in, we still have to strengthen the dialogue between the supporters and the opponents. I think it's become a lot better that we do talk to each other and not just talk against each other on panels, but that we sit together at the table and really ask each other honestly, what's in it for you, what's in it for you, with which TTIP could you live, where are your red lines, where are our red lines. That has improved tremendously, but I still think we aren't there yet. And then we also have to do the dialogue with the citizens. And we have started to do that. We have town hall meetings.
All over the country?
All over the country. And expert hearings. We are not organizing this. We commissioned an agency to do that. And it is a dialogue among the citizens with experts who they can call on. So I think to give space for citizen dialogue, that is really, really important, and really to zoom into the areas of TTIP which are controversial and really look at the facts and figures. That is very important to do too.
I mean, you have a fairly large, Chancellor Merkel has a large majority in the Bundestag, right? So, I mean, it's not like she's looking at a split parliament or anything of that sort. But there are other countries that have that problem. It'd be interesting to see what, given what's going on in London right now, how they can be an ally or or whatever the assets are. That's one of the last couple of questions I want to ask you. In looking around Europe, who is Germany's best ally on this, in terms of getting TTIP done in Europe?
Great Britain
Okay.
is a very good ally, but to be honest, Great Britain also has its other problems right now, and this is something I've seen in the last couple of months, anyways, with the migration crisis. TTIP has gone a little bit from the forefront to the back seat, I have to say. So there are more pressing issues which have to be solved right now, and TTIP which maybe is also a good thing, that we don't spend all our political energy on TTIP, but that we also deal with other things.
Like Brexit.
Yeah, like Brexit, for example, but also the migration crisis. The Greece issue is not yet solved 100%, so there are many challenges in the European Union. It's
But
not
you
just
need Britain on this. And
on TTIP, we definitely need,
Okay, yeah.
need Britain, but France has been a pretty good ally too,
Okay.
and the Nordics, really great allies. It's also the Netherlands, which are very much pushing for TTIP, and also Nordic states, which
Okay.
have been traditionally very trade-oriented, very free trade. And in those countries, interestingly, the unions are also very strongly in favor of TTIP, while we can't say that about our unions at home.
Yeah, I think that's probably a problem here too, on the U.S. side. Which gets me to my last question. What is it that the U.S. is doing right now that it should be doing more of? What is it doing that it shouldn't be doing? In other words, how can, from your perspective, Washington be helpful here in the process? Are they being helpful enough? Are there more things they can do? What's your view of how your partner on this side of the ocean is dealing with this issue?
Well, what I can understand is that a lot of political capital is now invested in TPP and the ratification of TPP, because that has been negotiated for a long time. It's now been signed, and now you can do the impact assessment, and the USTR wants to get that through Congress. And I do understand that timetable perfectly. So it's not a matter of that the USTR gives more importance to TPP than to TTIP. I think it's just a matter of timing. Okay. With regard to the TTIP negotiations, one thing which would help is having a bit more transparency on the U.S. proposals for the negotiations, and a little bit more transparency on the ideas which the USTR is pushing. The USTR rightly says, well, look into our model contracts for ISDS, investment protection, for example. You can look into previous trade agreements, look into TPP, and you know what we want to do with government procurement or regulatory cooperation. But those are really lengthy texts and not easy to understand. So what the EU Commission has done, they put out their proposals, made them public, and wrote explanatory notes to understand the proposals. And I think that would really help also the debate in Germany and in Europe if the US side also did that. These are our ideas, and this is how we explain them in easy words so that everybody can look at it. Because to be honest, I mean, who will read a 800 or 1,000 page TTIP text to get an understanding of how government procurement looks like? Plus, there are also always differences between trade agreements. TTIP will look definitely different than TPP. TTIP is supposed to be much more ambitious than TPP because of the membership. We can go much further in regulatory cooperation in TTIP than we can in TPP. So while we can look at previous trade agreements, they are not 100% blueprint for TTIP. So I think it would really help the public debate to have easily understandable explanations of the U.S. position.
I would imagine that's a very good suggestion, but I'm sure it's also going to come in handy with talking to 535 people who live on Capitol and work on Capitol Hill.
That's right.
Once the signature is done. So you got your hands full, but
That's
I think it was the German philosopher Ernst Bloch that said, Prinzip Hoffnung. Thanks for coming.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
See you next time.